Toxic masculinity. It seems to be all the rage these days, especially with the Me Too hysteria that has overtaken social media and the mainstream. Because that's what toxic masculinity does, you know. It turns women into abuse victims needing a cooling-off period of 2 decades before they can complain about it, preferably when their attackers are at the peak of their net worth and no actual proof is required. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there about what toxic masculinity actually is, most all of it coming from feminists. I know, that's hardly a surprise. Feminists talking endlessly about things they don't understand is pretty much their trademark, and their take on toxic masculinity is no exception. For a baseline definition, we will rely on the pinnacle resource for feminist scholarship, Wikipedia. Their take on it is straightforward, starting with the first paragraph. The concept of toxic masculinity, says Wiki, is used in psychology to describe certain traditional male norms of behavior in the United States and Europe that are associated with harm to society and to men themselves. Such toxic masculine norms include the traits of dominance, devaluation of women, extreme self-reliance, and the suppression of emotions." Unquote. There's a good bit more, but let's stop there for a moment. Wiki is saying in the opener that toxic masculinity is describing traditional male norms, not something aberrant, but the way males are in their normal state. Where they fail, and of course where all feminists fail though, is when they even begin to dip their toes into the details. Such toxic masculine norms, they say, includes traits of dominance, devaluation of women, extreme self-reliance, and the suppression of emotions. Let's take this one item at a time and put their ideas of what is toxic about men to the common sense test. Traits of dominance, they start with. Well, let's see. Men operate in a hierarchy. Hierarchy requires men to be ranked according to their level of power or authority. So yes, in all men, to one degree or another, there is an element of dominance built in, save for the men at the very bottom of the dominance hierarchy who have power over no one and usually no power over their own lives. And of course, following the logic of feminists, to correct this problem, we either have to, 1, end the dominance hierarchy, which is never going to happen, or we need to disempower men sufficiently to have them all reside at the bottom of the dominance ladder, ideally with women on top. And as we see feminist ideology and feminist policy in play, they certainly do seem to be doing their share of addressing the dominance problem. Next, and immediately after traits of dominance, we have the devaluation of women. Of course, this is complete and utter nonsense. Men, almost all of them, overvalue women in the most extreme of ways. A great deal of the effort we see men putting into ascending the dominance hierarchy with other men is rooted in the fact that the higher they go, the more attractive they are to women. Indeed, it might rationally be argued that were it not for the competition of sexual selection, there would be no male dominance hierarchy. Next, we have a very curious item: extreme self-reliance. A very positive trait to most normal people, and again, feminist claptrap be damned, a complete essential for men in the competition for sexual selection by women. Show me a man who isn't self-reliant, and I will show you a man with few, if any, sexual options. Finally, from the first paragraph, we have the suppression of emotions. And once again, we have a supposedly toxic masculine trait that seems to hold water, but only until you think about it. Sure, boys are raised with some pretty sick rules. From a very early age, they learn that big boys don't cry, most frequently from their mothers. Boys invariably learn a lot of things about being emotionally open. like how they will get ridiculed from other men, sexually rejected and laughed at by women, and all too often punished by parents when they are. We put unbelievable pressure on boys to shut down emotionally and then brand them as being toxic males when they wise up and build walls around themselves. But males, nonetheless, being amazingly adaptive, resilient creatures that they are, develop the greatest emotional acumen, creating emotionally ingenious art, plumbing the depths of the human heart in the form of poetry, song, literature, and the study of psychology. Where it concerns the human emotional condition, men overshadow women embarrassingly. That is not dominance or oppression. It's just the result of excellence and being better at something. But then I digress. More to the topic at hand, it seems that when you go down a list of all the things feminists find toxic about masculinity, they are all, and I do mean every last one of them, tied directly to what it takes to arouse the sexual interest of women. The vast majority of heterosexual women are turned on by the same things, by men's status in the hierarchy. The higher up a man is, the more women are available to him. You can write that up as a scientific law. Women are drawn to men's extreme self-reliance, stoicism, and tolerance for pain without complaint. To men being big boys, the bigger the better. So let's put this in a nutshell, a statement so simple that even a feminist can understand it. The more toxically masculine a man is, the more women are drawn to him. Men who aren't toxic, and I put that in scare quotes, sleep alone and find themselves in the dark hole of social and sexual rejection. If you are interested in ideology, put that in your pipe and smoke it. And think about what it really means for the people who allegedly want to make masculinity into something less toxic. What they are talking about is nothing short of marginalizing as many beta cucks as they possibly can. The anti-toxic masculinity movement is nothing but one great big shit test, an unconscious attempt by female feminists to cull out all men who won't make them tingle. You can bet on it, just as you can bet on the fact that toxic masculinity, as defined by feminists, is nothing more than a fairy tale. Mind you, toxic masculinity does exist, and I mean real deal, true toxic masculinity that the world could do without. I could do a lengthy and ultimately boring talk on the different aspects of true toxic masculinity, but I'll spare you that. Instead, I've developed a simple list of questions, the answers to which can help you determine what degree of toxic masculinity, if any, is part of your personality. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. Have you ever betrayed a friendship or broken your word because you were in pursuit of a woman sexually? Have you ever committed violence or wanted to commit or endorsed violence in the effort to protect or defend a woman's honor? Have you ever lynched anyone? Because, a whole lot of lynchings were based on the accusation by a woman of sexual assault, rape, or being whistled at. Have you ever spent money you could not afford to please a woman or to try to maintain her approval? Do you ever white knight for women, defending them from criticism simply because they're women? Do you issue a pussy pass to women, refusing to judge them harshly for immoral or illegal behavior? Have you ever attacked or demonized men in an effort to win the approval of women? I could ask more questions, but you're getting the point of what I'm saying, I'm sure. To whatever degree you answered yes to any of these questions, you are toxically masculine. And note that I did ask very specific questions about very specific behaviors. No need for broad swipes of muddled, difficult-to-define traits of dominance, devaluation of women, extreme self-reliance, and the suppression of emotions, the stuff we get from feminists. Still, I will call your attention to one unifying theme in this discussion that is of paramount importance. Whether it is my definition of toxic masculine traits or the now standardized idea of feminist imagination, they all point back to one primary driving force: the gynocentrism involved in human sexual selection. Dominance and hierarchy are about gynocentrism and sexual selection. So is parting with your values to pursue a woman. Extreme self-reliance is about gynocentrism and sexual selection. So is white knighting for women you don't even know, just because they're women. The suppression of emotions is about gynocentrism and sexual selection. So is issuing the pussy pass because you can't imagine women facing the same consequences for the same actions as men. What we can see, in the lines and between them, from the red pill perspective and the feminist perspective, is that every idea and notion we have of masculinity being toxic is tied directly to gynocentrism and sexual selection. Toxic masculinity is gynocentric masculinity. In the back of every man's mind who's afraid of making a public display of his emotions and his vulnerabilities is the certainty of ridicule and rejection from women if he does. He's not imagining this stuff. It's completely real and operating right in our faces every day. And his sensible, defensive reaction to that is what feminists call toxic. The women who toxically masculine men allegedly devalue are in reality the women whose judgments those men are afraid of. That terror as the natural state of affairs has been beaten into them their whole lives, psychologically and sometimes physically. That means it's going to take more than a couple of hashtags and bad advice from terminally stupid ideologues to solve the problem. And solving it, by the way, is simple, but not easy. If you really want to end toxic masculinity, the first thing you can do is douse chivalry with gasoline and throw a match on it. If men are not compelled to mindless acts of sacrifice by a mindless code, toxic side effects are a lot less likely. Next, heap shame on white knights. That's right, feminists, all those male allies you've been recruiting strangely in an effort to prove that you don't need help from men are the main harbingers of toxic masculinity. They have dispensed with reason and moral standards just to defend you at every turn. Many of them, at the very least, engage in violent rhetoric under the banner of being your ally. Quit using them as your instant mob and tell them to quit treating you differently because of your sex. And next, start dispensing blowjobs to men who cry in public, who lack ambition, and who are forever broke because they can't compete in the male hierarchy. Swallow the losers. Make poor performance and male emotionalism sexy. All it will take is a few thousand members of the sisterhood dedicated to the cause, and you could literally suck the world dry of toxic masculinity once and for all. Hashtag blow a beta. Or better yet, you insufferable fucking morons, you can actually figure out that masculinity is precisely and only what women demand that it be in exchange for sex with them. And I don't mean demand that it be as in your shitty blog post and talking points for the lamestream media. I mean the demand right where it actually is, in women putting a premium on the 3 S's: strength, stoicism, and success. Whatever you think about masculinity being toxic, you really ought to wake your silly ass up and realize that it's only as toxic as femininity requires. Till that little bit of reality settles in, nothing else under the sun will ever make any sense to you at all. Toxic masculinity is gynocentric masculinity. If you want masculinity that is truly not toxic, your best bet is to post your phone number to red pill venues offering sex and half your paycheck. And that is it for this talk. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and see you next time.